city councillors and the City of Edmonton staff. I would like to speak to you today about the funds that have been outlined in the 2023-26 budget for the Edmonton Valley Zoo. Could I have the next slide, please? There was an article in the Edmonton Journal earlier this month. Some excerpts from the article state that the Valley Zoo could be forced to shut down if it doesn't fix some significant problems, putting animals, staff, and the public at risk. The zoo is asking the city for $10.9 million to repair and upgrade enclosures for a number of animals. I am wondering, why did these safety issues and needed repairs get to this point when the zoo has received a great deal of funding over the years, to the tune of about $130 million in the past decade? The zoo must have known about these areas highlighted in your report long before now. The next bulletin, it says city administration recommends council fund repairs given the urgency. The zoo also expects continued funding for the second phase of Nature's Wild Backyard expansion. So why do we need new areas and new animal habitats when the existing habitats are in disrepair? Would it not make sense to ensure that all habitats meet the Alberta Zoo standards before we start building new areas? And lastly, the journal points out about Lucy's respiratory problems, which are abnormal and concerning for elephants, according to her most recent public veterinary records. So next slide, please. This slide highlights the findings from your report about the deficiencies and safety issues at the zoo. At the bottom, it's mentioning Lucy breathing in dust and contaminants due to a poor filtration system in her area. Also mentioning resulting injuries to zebras due to their design of their enclosure being unsafe. I won't go through the details because these are attached to the budget report, but again, just showing a lot of safety and issues of older areas that are in disrepair. So next slide, please. Another article from the Edmonton Journal where the Valley Zoo is requesting $50.3 million in renovations. This was in March. And again, Lucy was excluded. I'd like to note where it mentions that the council did approve borrowing $44.9 million to fund this. Also shown on in this article is that the Valley Zoo's consultant recommended that Lucy have a hydrotherapy pool. That doesn't seem to be listed here anywhere. So that was in 2021. So why does the city continue to foot the bill to bring in these consultants only to ignore their recommendations? There are numerous examples of this, but I don't have time to go into all of them today. Next slide, please. So my suggestions would be to ensure stronger oversight as to how the revenue is used by the Valley Zoo, reverse the decision for funding Nature's Wild Backyard Phase 2, and upgrade the issues outlined in the report. In addition, ensure all exhibits meet the Alberta Zoo standards for zoos before adding any new areas. Of course, it's long past time Lucy get what she should have had decades ago. She needs a larger area with access to mud and many more enrichments, which were outlined in your report, as well as the new filtration system to address the contaminants. Next slide, please. So while Lucy does deserve a habitat that meets species-specific needs and exceeds or meets standards, this will incur a significant expense for the city. Lucy already cost the city an estimated $300,000 per year. In 2011, Toronto City Council was faced with a similar decision about whether to expand or close their exhibit. They decided to close their exhibit due to funding. In Lucy's case, due to her poor health, it could be a big investment for a very short time. Instead, focus should be on relocating Lucy once her health is stabilized. There is much help offered out there to provide funding to help her get well and have her move. Zoos and circuses move elephants. No sanctuary has ever lost an elephant in a move. The risk-benefit ratio needs to be considered. The report states that there's concerns about the Valley Zoo and its poor reputation on the world stage. As someone who travels a lot, I can attest to the poor reputation of this zoo, and it's primarily based on Lucy's management. Thank you for listening to me today. I hope you enjoy the rest of your afternoon, and I'll be happy to answer any other questions you may have at the end.
And thank you very much. Yes, now we can. Thank you.
Oh, lovely. Sorry.
Okay, and can you see the timer then? The 5-minute timer?
Not really.
Okay, then I would suggest maybe if you could just sort of keep track of that time yourself, then that would be great.
Okay, no worries.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you for having me. I really appreciate it. I'd like to ask the council, until the various issues at the zoo are resolved, which I know that you are dealing with a few of them at the moment, and I'm very grateful, if you could not give them any more millions of dollars. There's already been about 110 million over the past decade, and still very important issues haven't been resolved. And in a climate crisis, obviously it's on everybody's mind. I've been listening for the past few hours, as well as various sports and recreation and everything else. And I think for a country such as Canada and Alberta, obviously, then the wildlife man spoke earlier, wildlife are at the heart of everything, really, as well as people. You know, the wildlife need their infrastructure, their climate, their mental health suffers in the wrong environment. And I think we've seen, certainly globally, Edmonton Zoo hasn't got the best reputation. There's been videos of distressed animals. There's obviously a lot of controversy over one animal who has absolutely no habitat whatsoever, despite the 110 million. So the council has done a great job, bearing in mind they've only been there a year. They've already got the first ever independent review properly done. So I say thank you for that. But as again, in a climate crisis, if my figures are right here, you've got 350 animals in between 45 and 100 acres, depending, whose figures are right. One of those animals alone needs 40 acres, 365 days a year, which they're not getting. So maybe the resources at the moment, it was heartening to hear the wildlife man talk about all the education that they're doing. And I think for children, and we've heard the youth speak, they're so concerned with doing the right thing by the wildlife, by the biodiversity. Perhaps money could be reallocated to supporting a more climate-friendly way of supporting wildlife moving forward, and maybe just have the species in the right places on Earth. So species like red pandas that do well in the particular climate, fantastic. You know, that can be world class. But also, there's been so many major achievements with other animals around the world. Perhaps it's the right time to let other places use their expertise for some of the animals, and then the 10 million wouldn't be needed, which could go to the swimming pools, the sports, all the other very important causes. And I thought it was actually heartwarming, the lady talking about her disabled son in the horse riding. The children have had it so hard with the pandemic. I'm a mum of 2 children. The anxiety in the schools is huge. They need their education more than ever. And I would just ask the council going forward, and that's, getting the basics right was what probably one of the first ladies in the last few hours said. And I think that it all comes down to that in the climate crisis, is getting the basics right. And I think probably that is, going forward, would be a lovely thing if the council would sort out once and for all the controversy surrounding the zoo before any more millions go into it. That's all I've got to say, really, and I thank you very much for the opportunity.
Thank you very much, Ms. Hooper.
Hi.
Go ahead, please.
Thank you, Council, for having me. My name is Marie Frabon. I am here to oppose any funding, which includes the $10.9 million in the capital budget for 2023 to 2026 to the Edmonton Zoo. I'm imploring the Council to please vote no for the funding of the $10.9 million until a complete evaluation is done by a third party on the zoo and its foundations. For the city and zoo to release all financial reports and itemized statements of spending over the last 10 years and make it readily available to the council and public for review by the Freedom of Information Act within 30 days. To also include an investigation into Gary Doerr over his tenure as director of the Edmonton Zoo. Over the last 10 years, the zoo has been funded $131 million. Most recently, in March of 2022, another $50.3 million was approved for winterizing certain animal habitats. Not $1 of it, might I add, was allotted for the elephant enclosure. Now, 8 months later, the zoo once again is asking for another $10.9 million for upgrades and improvements. There is a pool that was highly recommended by an expert hired by the zoo for therapeutic care for one of the animals. Yes, it was Lucy. Does the 50.3 or the 10.9 million include this highly specialized pool, or will additional funding be needed? Quote from Doerr, hopes it can be included in the 50.3 million, end of quote. Council and taxpayers, this is definitely a question that you should be asking now. Quoting Councilman Cartmell, the decision was made to be in the zoo business almost 20 years ago, end of quote. It should not be just a given to approve funding for the zoo because it's part of the city's regular maintenance and renewal plan. Over the years, but in particularly most recently, the zoo has continued to not adhere to their major deficiencies reported by the city itself. Before the 50.3 million was approved, yes, I know it's not a done deal, the zoo director, Gary Doerr, was fully aware, as were patrons of the zoo, of the aging zoo and all the deficiencies, which included animal and patron safety. Yet none of that money was allotted to those issues first. The reason behind the 50.3 million is to winterize some animal enclosures so the zoo could gain more foot traffic in the winter and add some comfort to the patrons in the cold months, as stated. It's called greed over safety. The taxpayers, patrons, mayor, as the council should be outraged after the findings of the city's report about their zoo. The report has been seen around the globe. It is extremely damaging to the city of Edmonton's reputation. Mayor Sohi, this is your city. So again, I implore you, before signing on the dotted line, please just say no to the $10.9 million for the zoo and all other funding. Please consider an investigation into the zoo and its foundations, the last 10 years spending report, and the dealings of the zoo director. Only then will you be able to make a very sound, fact-based decision moving forward. I thank you, Mayor Sohi and Council, for your time.